Do you think there are different levels of hell?
I do. Because they've told me those that near-death experiencers who had a taste said like Howard said, they even told him that. Like, this is nothing. Wait till you see where we're going to take you.
How many levels?
I don't know. Let me say different places, different. You know, what I would say is the world to come is vast. You know, so there are vast amounts of good places in the world to come.
Are there levels to heaven?
Yeah, which will throw some people, but in this sense, like, so the center of the holy city of God is the throne of God. Now, and I talk about this in Imagine the God of Heaven, that even talking about the throne of God and God the Father on his throne and this spectacular thing, God is more than that. So God incarnated in the person of Jesus as a representation of God in human form. I personally believe that there in the heavenly city, when we're not bound by our three dimensions, but we're our spiritual bodily selves in a new realm, that God the Father manifests in a way that the residents of heaven can see God. But the Bible tells us that God is spirit, and that he is both everywhere simultaneously and beyond everything he's created. He's in everything and sustaining everything. There's nowhere he's not at any point in time. But he's not just the sum of all of his creation. He transcends. He's beyond all of his creation. And what's wild is hearing near-death experiencers who had no theological understanding, no biblical understanding, and they're describing the same thing.
A lot of people are talking as if we're now in end times. I'm just curious if you see any symbology or if you think that we're approaching end times.
You know, I don't typically go there. And the reason I don't is because Jesus said no one knows the day or the time. So I don't know. But I'll tell you what I do know that I find fascinating. One thing is, as evil seems to be increasing, I believe God is giving increasing testimony of his reality and goodness. And I think these near-death experiences all over the world are that. I think he is saying in this day of global internet connectedness, look, I'm the God of all people. I love all people equally. It doesn't matter where they live or their background or what they've been through. And what he did through Jesus, he did for all people, for all time. So I think he's doing that. Now, having said that, there's something that happened in 1948 that was a precursor to the end, whenever the end is. And it also was one of the things that most convinced me that God is real back 30 plus years ago, when I was still, like trying to really think all this through and understand, is there evidence for it? So in the book of Isaiah, Isaiah wrote, like I said, in 780 BC, 780 years before Jesus. In Isaiah chapter 11, God says to him, in the last days, I will put a sign before all the nations. Again, he's speaking to all the nations. People don't realize that about the Bible. He's always thinking about everyone. And he says, I will regather the scattered people of Judah, the Jewish people, from the four quarters of the earth, so north, south, east, and west, and reestablish them in their land again, and they will never be displaced again. So he says that in Isaiah chapter 11, and the second time he was going to regather them. The first time was in 586 BC, when they were scattered to the Babylonian. They were conquered by the Babylonians. They were displaced from their land. Then they came back. They rebuilt the temple. They rebuilt Jerusalem. All that. In 30 AD, Jesus is crucified. And the week before that, he comes in on the donkey and he is looking out over Jerusalem, and it says he weeps over the city. And he says, if you had only known on this day what would bring you peace. But now your enemies are going to come on you and scatter you to the nations because you did not recognize the time of God's coming to you. So he says that. So Jesus is crucified in 30 AD. This is all history. Like, historians would not doubt this. 70 AD, 40 years later. Okay, so 40 years was the time of the Israelites wandering in the desert when they rebelled against God. I believe from crucifying Jesus, 40 years, I think God was giving to see their mistake. But 70 AD, Roman General Titus marches on Jerusalem, levels the city, levels the temple. Temple still hasn't been rebuilt to this day, but the Jewish people were scattered. And and Jesus had said that was going to happen. Isaiah the prophet, 700 years, had said that's going to happen as a sign to all the nations. From 70 AD to 1948, 1900 years, the Jewish people didn't have a land, they didn't have a king or a president, they didn't have a common language. I mean, when has there ever been a people scattered for 1900 years with none of that remained a people? How could they? And yet, in Isaiah chapter 66, again written before Jesus, God says through Isaiah, can a nation be born overnight? Of course, the answer is no. It's never happened. He said, yet no sooner is Zion, and Zion's the mountain on which Jerusalem is, established, in labor than she gives birth to her children. And he says, I will bring Jerusalem back and celebrate with Jerusalem. In 1948, okay, after the Holocaust, I mean, imagine the birth pangs of this birth that's to come. Evil's trying to wipe out the Jewish people. And I believe because this is a major sign to all the nations. It's God's sign that he cares for all nations. That's what he said it was. Jewish people from, Russian Jews, German Jews, Ethiopian Jews, Australian Jews, American Jews, from all over, come back and start to resettle Israel. And in 1948, the UN declared Israel a nation overnight. I have the article in the New York Times.
Wow.
But God said it, 2,700 years ago. Jesus said it. And then it happened. And he said it would be a sign to all the nations. So that had to happen before the end. Jesus then also said in Matthew chapter 24, he was talking about all the things that are going to happen in the end times. And he said something that was interesting. He said, when you see the fig tree start to blossom, you know it's spring. Even so, you know summer is near. In the same way, when these things start to happen, this generation will not pass away until all of it is accomplished. Okay, so I always thought, well, wait a second, that's not true. Like the generation he was talking to there did pass away, and it wasn't all accomplished. But maybe what he meant is the fig tree was always a symbol of Israel. And so when the fig tree starts to blossom, you know summer's near. When the leaves come out again, when it's brought back to life. So does that mean when Israel was brought back to life in 1948, one generation? And then the question is, what's a generation? Is a generation 70 years, or is it everyone who was alive in 1948 and might be 100 years old, so it might be 2058? I don't know. And I don't speculate. You know, what I say to people who are like all worried and fearful that it's going to be the end, I say, you're right. It's going to happen in your lifetime. It's going to end in your lifetime. Because we're all going to die. So I don't know how, but we don't need to worry about that. It's like live for what matters, and there's nothing to fear.
When these folks that have the hellish NDE experience, all of them, do the majority of them, do they convert?
I mean, a lot do. Not all do. I don't know. Actually, do I know anyone who's had a hellish experience? I think if they don't talk about it. They bury it and run from it. Because I can't think of anyone who hasn't. But maybe they just don't talk about it. I don't know.
Interesting. I would think they would. But it sounds like everybody that you brought up had.
Yeah, I mean,
kind of converted.
Well, and convert, I guess, what do you mean by that?
I mean, are they a believer now?
Yeah, I mean, just about all the people I've talked about are followers of Jesus. So they came back seeking and, they discovered.
Let's talk. We have a couple of random topics to bring up that
right.
You thought would be a good idea. So I'm just going to bring them up. Let's talk about the Hindu man that describes the city of God.
Oh, well, and this is in the category of why I wrote Imagine the God of Heaven. Like I said before, I really believe that God is raising up these testimonies all over the globe that he is the God of all nations. From Genesis 12, like we talked about, where he said he's going to raise up the Abraham and Sarah to bless all nations. Jesus comes. He says he took the bullet, because we are all meant to be his children. And so like a good parent, he went in front of the line of fire. What is required for justice? And he took the bullet for us so we don't have to. And then he said, tell all the nations there's forgiveness offered in my name. So again, all the nations. Revelation chapter 7, John is seeing heaven, and he said, there around the throne of God are people from every nation and tribe and language and people group. So God's going to do it, like somehow, some way. And I think that's part of what these near-death experiences in our age of global communication, when I couldn't have written this book 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Because I interviewed this Rwandan imam and Australian and, guy in Singapore and, all these people all over the world that I could interview by Zoom, and their story can be heard, but that couldn't have happened even 5 years ago. And so that's what I think he's doing. So Santosh became a good friend of mine, dear man. He grew up in India and Hindu background. His father was a Sanskrit scholar, so he knew the Hindu scriptures really well. He has his gallbladder erupted into his pancreas and caused his blood pressure to shoot up over 200, or his heartbeat was like 200 beats per minute, and they couldn't get it down. They couldn't operate, and he coded. And he hears code blue, and then he's above his body. And this brilliant God of light, he knew was a divine light, he said. And he said to me in the interview, he said, I always thought when you die, it's either nothing or maybe I would come back as another life form. He said, but that didn't happen. Instead, this divine light comes to him. And he said, I fell in love with this light because I knew it was good and there to protect me and cared about me. And he follows and he travels through, again, these tunnels that he said they went through. And he comes to this place and he's parked up on a platform overlooking what he described it to me as a giant compound. Now, I've been to India many times. We helped build a hospital in India. And India, if you've ever been, have you ever been? They're compounds. They're high-walled, gated communities everywhere, at least where I've been. And he described it that way, but he said, on the other side, your eyesight is like telescopic. So I could see like thousands of miles each side, and it was square-shaped and thousands of miles. And inside just these lush, gorgeous, just spectacular beauty and grounds of nature, but also these buildings of otherworldly building material. And he's a manufacturing engineer. So that's what he would notice. Otherworldly building material, these spectacular, beautiful buildings. And he saw people, and he said, I long to go in there. He said, I realized this is the place we all would love to be. That's what he said. And he saw 12 gates, he said. I counted them. I could see them all, 12 gates all the way around. And he said they were closed to me. And he looks at the nearest to try to find a way in, and he sees angels outside the gates. And he said, then I realize I'm looking at the kingdom of heaven. All right, now what he described is to the T what John describes in Revelation chapter 21 when he says he was taken in his spirit up to a very high mountain that others have described as these mountains taller than the Himalayas overlooking the city. And interestingly, John says he describes the city and somehow he reads the names on the foundation stones. How? Unless he's saying he too had telescopic vision. And this is in the Bible, right? John describes a walled, gated city, square-shaped, and 12 gates and angels outside the gates, exactly as Santosh described. Santosh had never read the Bible. All he knew was Hinduism. And then, interestingly, he's like, where am I? And he's looking around and he realizes he's up on a high platform, very high, and there's no railing. And he looks down to his left and he says it was hell. He said he was looking into what I think was a vision of hell. I don't think hell is right outside the city of God. And again, I think that's where time and distance and space, they work differently. But God showed him that. He said it was an abyss. He said it was a dark, hopeless abyss that he said had a lake of fire at the bottom, which even as a pastor, I thought that was metaphor. Because I was like, you can't have utter darkness and a lake of fire. The fire lights up the darkness. Mm-hmm. I don't get it.
Not there, huh?
I don't get it, but they said it. And this is a Hindu guy.
Yeah.
This is not someone trying to prove the Bible. So there's a lot of this that changed me to kind of go, well, maybe it's not all metaphor like I thought, or as much metaphor as I thought. So then Santosh is like, he doesn't want to go there. He wants to go in the city. And he's looking for another way in, and he turns and looks, and there he said he sees a throne, and who he said he knew this was the Almighty. So this is God, and he knew the brilliant light was God, but in this case, he was in the form of a man, but giant. Which again, I would have said like, what? But I heard so many say this. So I don't know what to do with it.
This is all of these. Wow. So
I
they're
know.
all the descriptions are very similar.
They overlap. All the ones I'm telling you have others who say the same things. Otherwise, I kind of just put them on a shelf.
Yeah.
Until I hear multiple ones reporting the same things, I kind of put it on a shelf and like, yeah, maybe.
Do you have this all mapped out somewhere? I'm just
I
curious.
wrote 2 books.
I mean, yeah, but 1,500-ish.
Oh yeah, I have
Interviews,
I have
I
so
mean-
many documents, just Word documents of interviews and Zoom interviews recorded and audio interviews recorded. And
How were you able to map them all into the
all
commonalities?
the different commonalities.
Yeah.
It took 35 years. I mean, I'm not kidding. It's like I didn't just set out to do this. I'm just obsessively curious, and I don't know why. I do know why. I now know why. I think this is God's mission for me. And, there were a lot of things along the way that I'd ask, like, why did I do that? Why did I become an engineer if you wanted me to start a church for skeptics, But all of it had a reason now. I see that. My engineer brain trained me, like, when things don't make sense, just hold on to them, keep at it until the puzzle pieces start to fit. And that's what he's used in this research too. So real quick with Santosh, what was amazing is in the presence of the Almighty, he sees this. He told me later he believes this was the glorified Jesus on his throne, because what he described is what John described in Revelation chapter 1. It's what Daniel described in Daniel chapter 7. This man of light, feet glowing bronze, and like face like the sun, eyes like lightning. He doesn't always appear like that. Mm-hmm. He doesn't. But he did to Santosh. He did to Bibi in Tehran. So it appears differently at times to different people. But Santosh thinks he's gonna cast him into hell because he has a life review and he sees all his sins and he knows, that's what I deserve. And when God speaks to him, he said, I felt such tenderness and mercy and compassion and love. He said, Santosh, I'm sending you back to earth. And when you go back, you must love your family and especially your daughter. She needs your help right now, which is fascinating.
Yeah.
I mean, this is supposedly the Christian God. Here's a Hindu man, but he knows intimately what his daughter's going through and how his daughter needs her father. Isn't that amazing? And he comes back and well, first of all, when he feels this compassion and tenderness and forgiveness from the Lord, he gets bold and he sees right next to the throne, he said, he called it this very narrow gate or door that was open to him. It was the only one that was open into what he called the kingdom of heaven. And he said, Lord, when I come back, how do I go through that door? I want to go through that door into your kingdom. How do I do it? Which is interesting because God does not often give instruction or direction. And again, I think it's because he wants to know, will we seek him? And he says, if you seek me with all your heart, you'll find me. But he did say this to Santosh because Santosh was thinking, what church do I go to? What mosque? What temple? I'll go anywhere. And he was thinking religion, like once a week religion. That's what he was thinking in his mind. And the Lord said, no, I want relationship. I want to know how honest, how sincere will you be with me? Not one day a week, 365 days a year. How sincere and honest will you be with me? And then he said to him, the wages of sin is death, which is a Bible verse, you know. And the next part of it is, but the free gift of God is forgiveness through Jesus. But he didn't tell him that part, which is interesting. He waited for him to come back and seek. And then he said to him, surrender yourself to me daily and walk with me. And Santosh told me, I was actually confused when I came back, because I was like, I know the gods of the Hindu scriptures, and this God of light and love, this mighty, almighty giant, you know, he said he was compassionate and tender, and he knew all my wrongs. I knew what I deserved, and yet he forgave me. He was compassionate. Who was this? And he's seeking him. He's praying every day. I want to know you. I want to know you. 2 years later, his daughter is invited to sing. She was a choral major in college. She's invited to sing in a choir at a church with her friend. Santosh goes to hear her. And when he walked in, he felt the same loving presence of that God of light. And the message that day is on the narrow gate and how Jesus is the gate through which you enter into the kingdom of heaven. And he told me, he said, I was like, this is just for me. And he goes home and he starts reading the Bible, and he said, everything I experienced was in this book.
Wow.
And he became a very devoted follower of Jesus. Now, Santosh passed away last month. Yeah, it's been pretty cool, because what he wanted more than anything, he loved his family so much, and he knew that's what God wanted him to do, was to love his family. And so I've been able to be a little bit in contact with them, and it's really cool to see them even opening up to what he was saying.
Yeah, I'll bet that's,
because again, you know, it's like he went. It's, you know, people get caught up in like, well, you're saying your religion is the right religion. No. You know, Muslims don't perfectly keep the 5 pillars of Islam. Buddhists don't perfectly keep the 8-fold path of Buddhism. Christians and Jews don't perfectly keep the 10 commandments. Atheists don't perfectly keep their own moral code. They too hurt people and do things that they later regret and have to apologize for. You know, none of us are perfect. And what God wants people to know is that he is a God who is willing to forgive all, so that we'll walk with him, just like he told Santosh.
Man, you know, I was going to go further, but that seems like the perfect way to end this. But, so John, if there's nothing else that you'd like to discuss, I say we cut it right there.
Sounds good.
Well, man, I just want to say thank you for coming on and sharing your experiences and with interviewing these people and your take on a multitude of different subjects that I threw at you. I'm sure some of them were a surprise, but actually there is one last question, and that is, why did you write Imagine the God of Heaven? What was the goal behind that one?
You know, Shawn, it was because I want people to see how God gets you, and he's crazy about you, like crazy about you, which sounds weird. But what I've realized is that each one of us is unique to him. You know, people will say to me, there are billions of people. How could he care about me? I have that same thought when I go through airports. I look at all these people, you know, and they're like, it's just a crowd to me, right? And yet, what indie ears have told me is that when they were with him consistently, they say, I felt like I was the only one he loved. One Jim Woodford said, I thought about others, and then I realized, oh, he loves them like they're the only ones. And that's because, and another one, Dean Braxton told me that what he realized experiencing that is that God has a unique love that's only for you because no one else he created is like you. And I want skeptics to know, like when I was a skeptic, there's a ton of evidence. This is not blind faith. There's a ton of evidence that this is real and this is true, so that they will put their trust in God. Faith, why does God care about faith? Because faith is just trust, and you can't have a relationship without trust. And relationship is what God wants. And so then, for others to see how the heart and the character of God is good and accessible, that even though it's mysterious, and I'll admit, how do you hear the voice of God? How do you walk with a God that you can't see and can't hear? And I go into that because just like communication on the other side is thought to thought, that's how God speaks to us, to our thoughts. And you have to start to learn to discern. And as you act on those, you look back and you see, like in an amazing way, like, oh my gosh, okay, like he is with me. And when I'm willing to listen and do what I think he's saying, he shows me. And so I wrote it for that reason, because I want people to see that God is the God of all nations. He doesn't like one group of people more than another. One's not more special than the other. There's nothing you do, have done, or ever could do that could change God's love for you. And he proved that by taking the bullet so that he could be just. And he is just. Like wrongs have to be paid for. Wrongs have to be righted to set things right. But he was willing to pay that price for us so that we can walk with him and become the people he created us to be.